gentlemen, just to recap, you will remember that we started this morning with Nico and Willy's contribution towards the way, towards the document. This document over here, and Willy's slides, and this, those ideas made us think our role and our purpose, our desires and our objectives, and then we had some refreshments, and now we have Prof. Hoffie Hofmeyr and Colonel Hilton Klein, who will take us through, as you can see on the program, the opportunities, threats, and conclusions. Now, please listen very carefully, because after this session, we are going to have another interaction. I will not force you to talk like just now, but I hope that you will have the opportunity and the urge to share with us your ideas, and there will be enough time. So make your notes, and once we start that session, we will then again listen to you. I'm going to take leave of the meeting for a few seconds. I just want to go and get the guys from the aircon before we all finish. Thank you very much.
It's a great privilege to be with you this morning, and a great privilege to briefly share with you some thoughts and some ideas. Before I do so, I just want to say good morning in 4 or 5 different languages by using, first of all, my mother tongue, Afrikaans, goeiemorgen, and then secondly, good morning, and then in Sotho languages, Tumelo Kai, and in the Zulu languages, Siyabonga, or not Siyabonga, but Kunjani Sopila, and then in Chichewa, the country, the language of Malawi, Muliwanji, and Tinaukai, and some of you will recognize that. I'm going to be relatively brief. I'm going to speak from my heart. I did not prepare a PowerPoint. I did prepare on paper. And essentially what I'm going to do is that I'm going to, first of all, have a brief introduction of myself, not so much about me as a person, but about my sort of context throughout the last 75 years of my life. I'm close to 75 now. And I feel privileged to have lived in this wonderful country for so many years as a whole. First of all, then a brief introduction. Secondly, I'm going to focus briefly on some opportunities in our context by means of a number of statements. Then I'm going to briefly focus on some threats, and then some concluding remarks before I come to a bit of a proposal. A humble proposal from my side, especially after I've listened to the audience a moment ago in terms of that we need action. Not with a sort of imposing mentality coming with action, but merely being driven by the Spirit of the Holy God, the Holy Spirit, and being moved by our context as builders of the kingdom of the Lord. So first of all, I'm going to start off with a brief introduction. I'm going to use the words of the great Mr. Mandela, and let us not ever underestimate his role. on this very symbolic day, 27th of April, 27 years after democracy, and after he spent 27 years in prison as well. And he very plainly said, as I walked out the door towards the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I will be in prison. I will still be in prison. And then, having recently read a very interesting article which will be published shortly in LitNet, one of the interesting online journals in our country, an article on Emily Hophouse. And you may remember that she was the British woman who took a very great interest in the predicament of those in the concentration camps. She was a pure British woman directly from England, and she just realized the realities of the concentration camps in 1899 to 1902 on the one hand, and then also on the other hand, the scorched earth policy followed by the British in this very painful struggle. And then she was invited to together with the old President Steyn of the Free State, to assist and be part of the inauguration of the Women's Monument in Bloemfontein. And she, at that occasion, very interestingly said very powerful words. Brothers and sisters from the Afrikaans community, you are here, and you have reached a point to forgive. To forgive the British enemy. Very powerful words which had a major significance in that period of time, and even in the decades to come. Briefly introducing myself, I've been born and bred in Pretoria. I've been part of different activities. I so much appreciate the presence of Dr. Hofmeyr today. In the old South Africa, I wasn't an activist, I was a reformist. In the new South Africa, I've become, to a very large extent, in a humble way, not in a violent way, an activist for a better future for this country. I was involved in the 70s and 80s with the Relations Committee of Pretoria. I still so vividly remember people like Freddie and Beulah Magadi. I still so vividly remember people like Sedge Mutau and other people who have been part of the Ford Motor Company close to Napiers. Since then, I've befriended people like Gerald Pillay, one of the most remarkable people I've ever met. Gerald Pillay, who was in the old South Africa, too black, or too not black enough, not white enough. In the new South Africa, he was, in the old South Africa, he was not white enough. In the new South Africa, he was not black enough. Gerald Pillay was now the only person of a different background, ethnic background, to be a Vice-Chancellor of a university in the UK. On the other hand, one of the great impressions on my life, Brigadier Bam, a remarkable person in many different ways. I still remember in the 70s when we had this motto with the Relations Committee, know one another, respect one another. I can so vividly remember, you may remember that the white wolf strayed on, killed and shot various people on the Stadium Square, and how we as the Relations Committee of Pretoria went a week after that to distribute flowers on the corner of Andries and Church Street, as it was known in those days. I did receive a death threat after that, which naturally was upsetting, especially for my wife. But I believe, and I have had opportunities through the academic world to move all over the world in different contexts, traveling, but maybe also having had opportunities to build a future. I am so deeply committed to this beautiful country of ours. And that is my brief introduction. Secondly, what I briefly want to focus, and it's going to be by means of statements, some of the opportunities of this context. And please be aware that I'm widely read, I'm widely informed, because I believe not in an ostrich policy of burying your head in the sand, of not becoming a Rip van Winkle, but being informed about what's happening in our country. And having had the opportunity to travel as well, and having seen very many different contexts in this world, these statements of opportunities may come over as naive, but I truly believe in them and it being realistic, and that we should work on these opportunities. By means of brief statements, I'm not going to expand on that, but bringing a fresh message and a unified message of hope to this country. First of all. Secondly, focus on the centrality of the love of Christ for South Africa and all its people. Thirdly, emphasizing the message, as Willie has done so extremely well, focusing on the message of the Sermon on the Mount within its broader biblical, but both New and Old Testament context. Fourthly, developing a new approach, attractive to all, which will largely be excluding dogma of different traditions within the Christian body. And even with all due respect to all my Christian brothers and sisters here, I believe we need to be in dialogue with people of other faiths as well, so that a value-based new message for this country can be created. Fifthly, including strategic leaders from all groupings to seek common ground and common enthusiasm. What I find so fascinating about the word enthusiasm is the essence of its etymological meaning, entheos, being in God, being enthusiastic because we are in God through His Holy Spirit. In the next instance, being prepared to deal with friction and acting as peacemakers in our world. And then the 2 or 3 last opportunities that we have by means of these very brief statements. Changing the culture of fire and blood in this country of ours to love as the overarching purpose for the future. And finally, transforming the culture of racial orientation to one of a common humanity. As I said, maybe some dimensions of it would be somewhat naive, being a practically minded person, and rather a greater doer than a talker. I sincerely believe that each of these statements that I made should be developed into concrete measures of different kinds. Then I come to threats. We've got many threats in our world and in our country. And can I be honest to you, in many different ways, in the old South Africa we used this as propaganda to say it's a world in one small country. I want to turn it around and really indicate, and I actually as a historian sincerely believe that this is the reality. That this country is in many respects an experiment for the larger and the greater world in which we live. Naturally, there are various experiments in various contexts. But if you think about rich and poor, if you think in terms of those who have and those who don't have, if you think in terms of so-called racial representation, if you think in terms of capitalism, socialism, if you think in terms of so many different issues, we are indeed in some way an experiment for this world. Many different threats for all of us. For us in South Africa, also by means of statements. What is more important? Our vested interests or our loyalty to God and the kingdom? Having buried my first wife after she passed away, there's nothing in that coffin. No pockets in that death cloth. No shells in that coffin. It's only about serving the Lord of the kingdom and the kingdom of the Lord and serving one another. And essentially, as Brother Nico has said, peace, reconciliation, nation building, but justice as well. And in that respect, I respect very greatly the contribution to the discourse of our times. And I pity the fact that so few, and also my church, the Dutch Reformed Church, did not pick up on the essence of the Bellar Confession of the Uniting Reformed Church of Southern Africa. Justice, peace, reconciliation. Essentially, those basic values. Second threat. We are all living with so many different presuppositions, whether we are pastors, whether we are professors, whether we are doctors, whether we are big shots, whether we are humble people. We have so many different presuppositions, and all of these presuppositions filter down into our communication with one another. Let's be honest, so often we do have our hidden agendas. When you grow older, you forget about agendas. Naturally, we are all people from a specific context. But we should get liberated from so many of these presuppositions. Thirdly, the inability to straddle the race barrier. Inability to straddle the race barrier. Even in the new South Africa, there are significant levels of distrust, of misunderstanding, of racism across the board. And then finally, our rigid adherence to caricatures and perceptions of one another. We have so many and such a range of caricatures of one another. Let us be open to one another. I'm now coming to some conclusion remarks and then coming up with a humble proposal. You all know that we are teetering on the brink of anarchy, lawlessness, and we have the potential to slide into a struggle and a bloody future if the Lord and so many other factors in our society will not be victorious. We should not underestimate the reality of our situation and the potential that there would be for further conflict. The next remark, the purpose will have to be to change our culture in so many different ways. I must say, being widely read and being widely informed in so many different respects, I sometimes sincerely believe that we are, to quite an extent, a reconciled nation. Sometimes I feel more than various other contexts in this world. We not only sometimes refuse, but we are even not willing, or we are blind enough not to see the level of reconciliation. But then reconciliation once again with justice. My brother Nico, I sincerely respect you and I so much appreciate you. You've brought new vistas into my life. But that is so important, that it's a reconciliation with justice. And then some last remarks. You may ask, how do I feel about the future? Can I tell you, between my and my second wife, we've got 5 children. And we can just, and I'm not judging those who left our country, young people who left our country. But amongst these 5, and all very privileged to be professionals, all 5 of them are here and wishing to build a future. The Lord has called us to be South Africans. I secondly also feel it's not princes or premiers or presidents who are going to save this country. I do respect some of them, but I can tell you my respect for some of the others are not that great. We have to live with them, but it's not them, it's us, the civil society of this country, die burgerlike samelewing, the churches, faith-based organizations, the good-willing people who are going to save this country from a bloody revolution. My hope is not on the decline. My hope, realistically judged, is on the incline for the future of this country. And I do not say that for cheap purposes, or I do not say that with a naive, idealistic mentality. I say that with true conviction. This is one of the most beautiful countries, and I sincerely believe that what is so true, coming from Romans 14, verse 8, is if I live for God. If I die for God. Whether I live or die, I am part and I belong to God. My final proposal in the end. And not being naive about anything, but being realistic. And this wasn't part of our communication within our core committee who organized this day. And Prof. Nico and Dr. Willie, they are the prime leaders together with Colonel Hilton Klein. But it's part of the very useful opportunity we had a couple of minutes ago to say who we are and how do we look upon this day. And also, in another way, without being naive, stating that it's also the Lord's Spirit that has guided me through all of this. I want to propose to you, in respect to Hofmeyr, who has been part of the Cottesloe consultation in 1960. I haven't been officially part of the Rustenburg consultation of 1990, but I can still vividly remember a consultation with Beyers Naudé and various other people, and also Ben Marais, who are possibly one of the greatest prophets, greater even than, I would say, Beyers Naudé. Because already in 1948, he said, you cannot base apartheid on scriptural grounds. I delivered a paper in 1990, the differences between Cottesloe and Rustenburg. And you may remember at Rustenburg, Willie Jonker, one of the profs of Stellenbosch, stood up and said, I confess my guilt and the guilt of the Dutch Reformed Church in what happened in South Africa. I want to hinge up on my sister, and I know her very well, and she's grown in many different respects to be a very mature person, Christina Landman, who has hinted at the possibility of a Kudesa or a consultation. Also after 30 years, we've used the metaphor of 27, 27, 27 in a different way earlier. 30 years Cottesloe, after Cottesloe, Rustenburg, and now 30 years after Rustenburg. The Pretoria maybe consultation, and I'm not just doing of bringing together all people who are sharing the values of a future society of peace, justice, reconciliation, nation building. Christina Landman has raised this idea some weeks ago. I want to hinge on to that. And my proposal, with the permission of some of our core committee members, is to share this with the group as a whole, so that we really become practical, not becoming another talk show. I think at this event, an informal steering committee has to be formed to get into communication with people like Christina Landman, who is a very prominent woman theologian, with the South African Council of Churches, with church leaders across the board, and as we have discussed with Dr. Isak Burger, with Bishop Lekanyani, the largest African independent church movement in this country, and so many others across the board, and even politicians who are willing to stick out their neck and say, we are believers and we want to support this movement. With all due respect, as a church historian, the South African Council of Churches has become too much of a talk show in our times, with some prophetic voices here and there, but are they really instrumental in building a new future? I want to end off by saying, the time for bitterness is over. In the words of Nelson Mandela, and the time to forgive has maybe come. That we don't only look at the past, but that we face future and build this as a wonderful experiment, maybe to be followed elsewhere in the world. I say in Chichewa Sikolo Kwambiri, I say in Afrikaans baie dankie. Thank you very much. Siyabonga kakhulu. Thank you very much.